Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Sneering on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer on Lord of the Rings Online. I've been doing this for a very long time. So, in the lead up to the launch of Before the Shadow, we were trying to find different things and different ways to um, kind of introduce what's going on with this expansion pack. And unfortunately, as we announced last week, we did have to push out the release date, but we thought it would be a good opportunity to do something a little bit different, a little bit special for a stream today. So a while back, I had been talking about once we had gotten through all of the strolls through the different regions of the game, we might try to do something a little bit thematically focused for the stream as opposed to region focused. And we felt that with Before the Shadow coming out and a lot of lore of ages past kind of being associated with it, this would be a good opportunity to try one of those theme streams. So today, the theme of the stream is the Kingdom of Arnor. And we're going to be just taking a tour through some of the major landmarks associated with the Kingdom of Arnor and its subkingdoms Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur, at least as far as they're represented in the game. So, as with all of my other streams, this is a world design focused stream. So, I'm not going to be answering any questions regarding things like PBMP, lag, um, other legendary items, like other hot topics that might come up, because that's not my area of expertise. If you do have questions about those things, I highly recommend you go to the message boards and ask them there. But if you have any questions about level and world design stuff, I'm happy to answer them the best I can. Um, so, with that in mind, oh, and one other thing too. Uh, One of the things I always routinely forget to do as I am doing these streams is forget to have a drink. So I have water and Gatorade here waiting for me. If it's been a while since you've had me have a drink of water or of Gatorade, let me know in chat so that I can pause and have a drink. So without further ado, let's get this started. So we're starting here in Evendim. Way back, we did do a stroll through Evendim. In fact, we've done a stroll through basically every region that we're going through. But Evendim is probably kind of the best kind of anchor point, the greatest starting point that we could have for this kind of stream. This was introduced to Lord of the Rings Online shortly after the launch. I think it was it's our first major landscape update of the game. And Annúminas itself, while it was built, the content within it was blocked off until a subsequent update, at which point players could actually get in and explore the city of Annúminas. So this was kind of our first stab at building an epic uh, city in Lord of the Rings Online. We've done smaller places. I think at that point, Breland and Breetown had been our biggest city, um, and this was really kind of us figuring out how to build something this big. And one of the things you might notice looking at this is there are familiar shapes and forms that our artists who have been on this project a similarly long amount of time have kind of taken and evolved and grown over the years as we approached Gondor. So, anyways, also thank you for those of you that are showing up here today. I know we've got Bull Roar running, which is exciting, and hopefully will give you all a taste of what's going to be coming out next week. And we also have some server downtime happening right now, so this is a good option for you all if you're looking to get your Lotro fix while you're waiting for the servers to come back up. So yes, we are here, and pardon me, the admin camera is a little tricky to use sometimes. Let's go right back to me. So we're gonna just start here at the castle on Tilinun and make our way uh, out of Annúminas. Um, so this was a fun area to build, in part because, like I said, it's the first time that we'd ever made anything of this scope in Lord of the Rings. Um, so we had a lot of kind of learning and figuring out to do. One of the hallmarks of this of this area is the land control system that's happening in here, where you have the forces of Angmar contesting the territory with the Rangers of the North. And the players can help basically flip the keeps, which change and alter what is accessible through the landscape here in the area. So, for example, Tierband is under Ranger control. I've even seen some players that are looking for specific enemies and whatnot. So what they'll do is they will intentionally force keeps to flip out of Ranger control and into Angmarum control, just to kind of ease themselves through um, some of the stuff that they might want to do. So, for example, this keep here, um, since we just loaded in, is now under control by Angmarum forces. Um, and if I wanted to, I could defeat all of them and subsequently take control of the keep for myself. I believe there are deeds associated with killing the leaders uh, or defeating the leaders of each keep. So very often, again, that's one of the reasons why you'll see players intentionally trying to flip keeps back and forth so that they can complete those deeds effectively. So I do apologize in advance as we're running through this. My a lot of my awareness of everything going on in here is purely from a level design perspective, and not necessarily from a lore perspective. I know a little bit of the lore, but I don't know that I'll be able to answer all of the. Oh, let's help these guys. Oh, the Rangers died too. Oh well. I don't know that I'll be able to answer all of your questions regarding the lore of the space. It was interesting to read, both for preparation for Before the Shadow and for what we're doing next, he says cryptically. Um, Interesting to read a lot of the backstory, and our story people did an excellent job of taking what we know of the Kingdom of Arnor and weaving stories into it and out of it, and finding ways to connect the stories that are going on in here, going on that have gone on within the kingdom in the past, to what players get to deal with in the present, at least um, the present of the game, anyways. So Steady Eddie asks, "Do you support Angmar or the Rangers?" I think I'd lean more towards the Rangers myself. There are not a ton of Angmarum that I'm like, hey, he's a cool dude. I jive with what he's saying. Um, so there's not a lot of Angmarums that I would actively side with. Um, I think the Rangers can be a bit they can be a bit zealous sometimes too, but I think overall Team Ranger. And depending on the outfits, you could pretend to be a Power Ranger, so that's fun too. Um, yeah, Soft Snake said, "Yeah, I killed them all." Yep, I did. That's the byproduct of that command that I used. So let's see. Eros216 asks, "Is the lake here the largest single landscape feature you've built?" No. So one, when we were building Evendim, we had a person whose job it was to kind of do the first pass landscape, and one of the things he did was he used tools very similar to what I've been using with Before the Shadow to build out a more naturalistic looking landscape around the lake. So he did that first pass. Um, and then the world team came in, and we all kind of had our pieces and parts of Evendim that we built out. Um, as far as a landscape feature goes, I will honestly say Before the Shadow is the single largest landscape feature that I've built. Between Swanfleet and Cardolan, we've got, I think it's around like 1,600 land blocks worth of landscape that I was responsible for doing the first pass sculpt on, and did a considerable amount of the landscape work on. So I would say that's my like single largest feature. Um, oh yeah, so Stars and Ranger says, "What gorgeous water!" Yes, the water textures that we use here on Lake Evendim are gorgeous, and while they are not as interesting as the dynamic river waters that we can produce can get, this is still just like a gorgeous lake water that doesn't need the ripples and the water flow as much as something like a stream does. So it holds up really, really, really well. And looks great and does a great job of kind of reflecting everything around it. Sleepy Lol says, "Hey, have a question regarding the connection. Is there not a way to play the game with VPN on?" So I'm sorry, Sleepy, that's not a question I'm going to be able to answer for you. That's a bit more of a tech-specific question, and you'd be better off asking that question on the message boards. This is a world design focused stream, so if you do have questions regarding world design, level design, what it takes to build a dungeon, to research landscape, that's the kind of question that I'm best suited to ask here. So we've come out of the Annúminas, and now we are in the Way of Kings, which is all of the different tombs for the kings of Annúminas, the kings of Arnor, aligned this way here. This was something that I think our story folks had a lot of fun doing the deep research on, and diving into like who would be buried here, what their histories were, and to some degree how much of that can we actually talk about, considering what our license was available, what we had available in our license. And then we have the Colossus of Evendim, which I'm pretty sure was a invention of ours. I don't think necessarily that there's anything in the lore specifically stating that this existed, but I think we wanted to have a way to really, indicate. I can't use this, can I? Yep. All right. Really have a way to indicate what grandeur this kingdom might have once had. So I'm going to cheat so we can have a great view of Annúminas in the distance while I take a look at chat real quick. So Steady Eddie asks, "Do you enjoy the challenge of having to design these worlds within limitations of the game engine? I.e., is it an interesting challenge?" And I would say yes, it very much is so. Like I'm someone that I deeply believe that restrictions kind of force everyone to be a little bit more creative and more thoughtful in how they build and how they work. So there was a time where like I think my motto for a while was restrictions breed creativity, and I think building in Lord of the Rings Online is something that is very where that is very true. It forces us to think about forces us to think a little bit more about like how densely we can build something versus the performance associated with it, how how many different creature types we can have before it starts feeling like cluttered and a bit of a menagerie versus something that feels natural. So I definitely think that a restricted engine kind of helps us be a little bit more thoughtful in when we're building out something of this scope. That's not to say we don't push it. I think we certainly do kind of push the limitations of what we can do, and how things can be built. Oh, I have to use this to get down. So like there is a there's kind of like a back and forth battle on that as far as that front goes. So now that we're leaving Annúminas and we're heading out towards the North Downs, we will see more lovely ruins of of Arnor on our way there. And we'll try to skip through some of these spaces so that we can take a look at them while we're on the way. We're on the way to one of the first like landscape teases I think that we'd ever really done, where in the original game the area that we're about to pass through was was blocked off, and the map had a little signifier saying to Evendim. And I remember in beta, before the game launched, there was much like there is now whenever a new map shows up. Um, there was this debate, a very like intense debate on the message boards about Evendim because they could see the signifier there and they didn't know what it meant because the way there was blocked off, as you'll see here as we cross into the North Downs through the Evendim Gate, appropriately named. I don't think we were originally planning on Evendim being our first region, but it worked out pretty well for our story and for what we were telling with Amarthiel. So now that we're out of Annúminas and Evendim, we're in the North Downs. This is kind of more a portion of the subkingdom of Arthedain, so the ruins here are a little bit different. We do have Fornost, which is another major capital of the Arnorian kingdoms, which we will get to very, very shortly. We got to get through the fields of Fornost first. This was a fun, creepy area to build. It's a spooky place that's similar to the Barrow Downs and Breland, but just different enough that it stands on its own. And honestly, this area was kind of some of the inspiration for what we have going on in Tir and Gorthad now, for Before the Shadow. Feeling like players playing through Before the Shadow wouldn't really get the creepy Barrows-y kind of experience that they got if they played through the normal original story, and certainly wouldn't get into the North Downs. So we wanted to have some of that come into it. So here we are at the gates of Fornost, once a proud capital and bulwark against Angmar, has long since fallen to ruin. I think at one point we were thinking about doing a sort of Tales of Yore-ish instance experience in here, letting players go back in time to a more pristine space. But that has long since, I think, fallen the wayside. I think when we were doing the tour, I got to fix the spec on these things. That's fun. When we were doing the tour of North Downs a while back, we popped into that space briefly to take a look at it. So a lot of Fornost is very much what I would call the theme park design, where it was originally one major single instance, and a lot of what's in here was built kind of as a series of channels. You're going room to room, fight to fight, and it's not necessarily built really as though it was an actual city, an actual kingdom, an actual fortress. It was more like, hey, we need to hit these beats, and I think we're a bit more thoughtful about that sort of thing now, and that we want to make sure that what we build is a little bit more representative of what a real place might be like or act like. So don't mind me as I rocket jump around. Hopefully no one's getting too motion sick from this. If you are, let me know, and I will do my best to kind of mellow out a little bit on all of this as we work our way through here and up to the entrance of the city. I think like looking at a lot of these things, it's a lot of like building blocks that suggest certain kinds of shapes and forms, but don't necessarily really represent what a real space would be like. So let me just rocket myself up here to the real good view here. I'm not gonna go inside any of the interiors really today, because we've seen a bunch of those already. The idea is to just kind of like overall get a view for, you know, what everything looked like. Don't mind the fire floating out there. That's just the effect. So we'll go down through some more, see if there are any more questions. So Soft Snake GR says the colors of the ruins of Arnor, just like Fornost, are mostly gray brown. Have you envisioned that those buildings had once better colors in the past? So I think, you know, there's certainly historical evidence in the real world of, you know, you look at ancient civilizations, you look at Greece, you look at Rome, you look at how those places look now, and they are these like dull gray ruins. Also, don't mind me, I'm shortcutting my way through because I do want to get to. I want to see if I can get to. Oh crap! Now it's escaping my brain. Uh, Esteldon in a timely manner before heading south into Breland. So I think that there's a lot of history, there's a lot in history showing that, you know, what we think of as these, you know, white marble walls and statues and whatnot were actually very colorfully painted pieces of sculpture, pieces of architecture, and I would not be at all surprised if, you know, similar things were true for these civilizations. I mean, you can even look at sort of what we've done with places like Gondor, where there's a lot more filigree and detail in things that just don't exist currently in places like Fornost, and in part because like those are so long abandoned that it's not shocking to think that, you know, they've abandoned, and, you know, brigands have come in to, you know, basically pluck all of the gold filaments off of things. Uh, So we are almost to Esteldon. Don't tell anybody that it's there. No one's supposed to know it's there. Shh. But Esteldon really acts as kind of the western or the easternmost outpost of Gondorian style or Arnorian style, acting as sort of a like bulwark, sort of a station, as you would, against to observe the movements of Angmar. Um, you'd think people would know it was here with the amount of traffic that was happening through here and still continues to happen through here, but hey, it is what it is. So here we are in Esteldon, zooming our way through, zoomy, zoom, zoom, zoom. Um, I think Esteldon itself also represents a slightly different style of building and of architecture compared to what we saw already in Evendim and in other portions of North Downs. Like, things here are a little bit, you know, blockier, a little bit less fallen to rubble. This does suffer from one of the things that when I revamped Breland, I actively tried to improve upon is, you know, us basically shoving ruins into walls, you know, so that we could have playable space here, still give the implications of ruins, but just build right up into the walls. Like, things like this aren't usually built this way unless they are, you know, kind of better integrated with the landscape, and this just feels shoved in. It doesn't feel integrated in, and it's again something that I think we try to be a bit more mindful of as we build out in the future. See, a reminder to drink. Druid's Fire says, I do like that the world building in general hasn't been a static thing. The methods and tools have evolved over time. Sure, it makes older areas seem dated, but playing through the story lets you watch the evolution of techniques. Yep, and I think too, like, one of the greatest challenges we have is like resisting the urge to go back and redo, just because of the sheer amount of work that it would take for us to do that. Um, remaking the world to use the modern techniques that we're using, like taking Breland or Erdluin and redoing it using the same processes that I used to make places like Carbonach and Swanfleet and Cardolan. Like that's a considerable amount of work that we just don't have the time and people power for. Um, but I think one of the things that we're always sort of striving for is to um, do what we can to make whatever new things we create look and feel as modern as we can make them, at least at the time that we're making them. So, like the original game, you know, looked modern by modern gaming standards at that time. And then time moves on. And there are certainly some parts of it that definitely still hold up, and there are aspects of it that hold up that we're, very proud of. But then there are things where it's like we try to go in and clean up where we can. Like the passes we've made on cleaning up after the legendary servers started launching. Those updates started launching. Those are things that we really wanted to try to improve how things looked and felt. Let me pause here. Let me look out over Nenharn. Those are things that we really tried to like employ some of the things we've learned in a already existing region, and there's only so much we can do without really doing more than we ought to, more than QA has time to test, and more than we have time for in our schedule. And there we go. So I can run forward while looking at things. Arrow says, would you like to revamp Esteldon? So I think there are certainly aspects of Esteldon that we could build in a more thoughtful way, that we could make it both feel a little bit more secret of a space than it is. But I think there's other bigger fish for us to fry than going through and revamping Esteldon right now. Let's see. Are the so Soft Snake GR says, are the Ettenmoors considered Arnorian style, or are they something from a different time period? So I would feel like Ettenmoors kind of falls into Rhudaur. So the Rhudaurim, another kingdom of Arnor, sub-kingdom of Arnor. Of the three, there's Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. And Rhudaur kind of is east and north of Weathertop, which is where we're heading next. Weathertop kind of being the uh, central point between all three of the subkingdoms of Arnor. It's where often the three kingdoms would meet, and it was often used as kind of a beacon and watch point for enemies, particularly Angmar. And it was something that the Witch King was really, really, really wanting to see torn down. So now we have another different kind of like style of ruin here. I think this set was part of what's called the Battlefield Ruins set, which was heavily used in Fornost. It certainly got some shape forms though that are really like interesting and appealing. It's simple, which is nice. Um, Makes it mostly square, but there's some arcs and whatnot which are useful for design. Square is great for just like gameplay purposes. You can see off in the distance we've got Weathertop showing up over here. I think this keep here is one of the first times where we really experimented with tilting walls in ways that they weren't originally intended to be tilted. So typically, the way our tools work, and in order to facilitate things like passing and pathing and whatnot, we can only really rotate physical objects on the heading. We can't bank or pitch them. If we want to do that, we have to turn off path maps on them in order to get those angles of rotation. So here is really kind of the first place where we played a little bit with that, where we have some ruins here that are like pitched a little bit differently than normal walls and structures, but because they can't have path maps on them because of that, we've made them inaccessible to players. All right, let's see. A couple more questions. Do you have a favorite ruins asset, a wall, lantern, door, etc. from Stars and Rangers? I mean, honestly, like this Battlefield Ruins set really appeals to me. I've used some, like, I think one of my favorite interiors recently that I built a while ago was in Vales of Anduin on the island there. Um, there was like a small interior that I don't know that the full extent of it ended up getting used, um, but a good portion of it was used, and it was just fun building, kind of using those like old castle feeling structures, and also building in a way that like felt kind of like it was a realistic space. Felt like I think some of our older, particularly the old like castle interior sets, which have these very rounded hallways and rounded rooms, like those don't work very well if you're trying to think about building something that could actually exist. They're great for like gamey purposes, but they're not really all that great for building something that could have been a real or something that would have been built in a way that like made sense for people. Um, so that interior that I built for, that's curious. I wonder what that's about. Um, that interior was really something that like felt like I was building kind of a real old keep, or at least the catacombs of a real old keep. So Weathertop. So now that we're here, to kind of swerve back in. So Weathertop is a place that has seen many changes, both in terms of game lore and lore in general, and in terms of development. Weathertop was kind of one of our first gameplay spaces for the game when we were showing it off to people. See if I can zoom out a bit. One of the first gameplay spaces we had, don't mind me, as my camera clips through the physics. That's what happens. That we had ever built. It was also a 6-person instance at one point that could easily take like 3 or 4 hours to run because of the number of ads and how you had to wrap your way around everything. But you still get this impressive view, and it's even more impressive now that the South Downs is open for business and you can see across through there. So like I was saying, Weathertop is very much the central point, kind of where all of the sub-kingdoms of Arnor kind of meet. And because of that, a lot of important stuff happened here, and it was a focus of enemy assaults. To the east, we have officially, kind of the kingdom of Rhudaur, and you can see here, and we'll run down past these ruins. There are a couple of different ruin types represented here, and the idea being that Rhudaur's ruins are a little bit more kind of gray-green than other Arnorian ruins are. We have the kind of the white stone from Evendim. We've got these like gray rocks from the battlefields of Fornost. We have this sort of like gray-greenish set of ruins to represent Rhudaur. We also have different iconography. So if you look here, You'll see here the crown of Arnor is represented by pine trees, and that's kind of the symbol of the kingdom of Rhudaur, at least in our game lore. So yeah, I remember building some of these years ago, and again, it was very much a like, I'm looking for more shapes than I am looking for realism when I'm building things, and my mindset has definitely changed over the years as far as building out this sort of stuff. Um, so we'll do our last stop here in the Lone Lands is going to be Oscaruth. We won't go deep into the Red Swamp and Garthagarwin, just because it'll be a little bit of a pain to get back out of, and we still have a good amount of ground to cover. We got Cardolan to cover, which is a massive amount of space. So we'll take a look here at Oscaruth. Oh, I didn't even realize this existed. I don't come to this side of Oscaruth very often. The little things people drop in every so often that surprises me. I remember building out the shapes of Oscaruth here and building the interior, which Radagast resides in here. But yeah, like this, walking around at least in the center here, like feels a little bit better to me as a town than something like Esteldon, because it gives each of these buildings, sort of an opportunity to actually be kind of a building itself. Um, like it's the buildings are implied by the ruins of the walls, and it doesn't feel like they're just kind of like jammed in everywhere. Um, so this definitely feels a little bit better to me. I could see this being like, oh well, this is big open space. Well, that's because here there were like wooden structures that have long since fallen and decayed. All right. So Dterp says, so where did the Alagos ruins come from? This level 55 place seems a bit out of place between Breland and the Lone Lands. So that was very much an experiment. So those ruins were the ones that I was talking about with the kind of slanted ruined walls in the hills and whatnot. That was an experiment by us to see what we could do with bringing some higher level content into lower level areas. The original intent was like, I think we were at level 50 at that point. Players were going through Angmar, they were playing through that content, but we wanted to find a way to incentivize those high level players to come back to the low level zones. So stuff like that was built specifically to act as a reason for players to come back there, but it was also meant to be kind of like off on its own in its own little space enough that low level players could see it, get close to it, and then realize it wasn't for them. I think the biggest difference between that and a player like a low level player crossing into a higher level zone is the challenge level in general for that area was still low level. So the aggro ping system that's in place in the game wasn't going to affect the players, and they weren't going to low level players weren't going to have these level 55 half orcs just all of a sudden being aggressive on them from out of nowhere, which is different than like if you are level 20, crossing into the Vales of Anduin from the Misty Mountains, for example. You are going to make every single monster that's loaded be very angry at you for being in there. So we'll follow the former impassable of the Lone Lands here to head west a little bit. So we'll head through here, and then we can kind of, once we get towards the Forsaken Inn, we'll hang a left and follow the road south so that we can kind of get into things there a little bit more. Oh, hey, that's a floater. I'll have to remember to come and fix this. So I do remember, like, one of the things I definitely remember about building these spaces here was trying to imply the feel of a interior location without actually having to go into a dungeon. Um, and building those sorts of things is always a little hit or miss just because of the way lighting is, and lighting doesn't always update the way you want it to. We have some tricks that we can use to try to help that along a little bit better, but it doesn't always work out for us. One of the things that we were excited about doing, I think this was a post-launch edition, was basically having this path that sort of connected all of the various southern ruins together in a way that players could just kind of breadcrumb their way through without needing to like fight their way in, do what they wanted, fight their way out, back to the main road, head east, do the same over again. It was a much more intended to be like a convenience feature for players, and I think it worked out well. And I believe there's content now in place that kind of like follows that path as players go that way. So one of the other things that we did pretty regularly was, and we called it like the evilification pass, particularly in areas where we wanted to emphasize that it was the like end of the camp, and there was a major Angmarim hook in it. And we're not going to really be able to see it right now because of I'm currently cloaked, and I do not cloaking does not cause day file changes. But when you get into places like this, the day file would change to something more ominous and evil, and we would call it the the eviling up of a camp, purely just so that it was even more clear that something nefarious was happening at that location. So we'll go down through some of the questions and talking points here. So Soft Snake says the Loneland feels so tiny and small now that we have Cardolan in the south. I think that's one of the pros and cons of us opening up the landscapes as we have been doing. Bringing more wide open spaces makes places that previously felt grand on their own but a bit more intimate feel more bare and more kind of like naked to the world. Like it's not as cozy. Lonelands isn't as cozy as it once was now that the walls to the south are open. And the change as you go between the regions is very stark. So for those of you that like good views, one of the things I was made sure to happen was we made sure we had plenty of great views of Weathertop, as well as Cardolan, which we'll see as we kind of surmount the hill here. I believe the far view is set enough so that we can see both Weathertop and Cardolan from here. So we'll climb up here. So you can see Cardolan in the distance, which is intended to be our, castle of note for the Kingdom of Cardolan. And you have Weathertop there in the distance. This might be even better hill to climb up on to see that. I think with Cardolan, it was very important for us to make sure that we had these like broad vistas, these open lines of sight, so that you can get this just like almost overwhelming sense of open world. Let's see. So Denric Kamar says, what are some of the tricks you use to create a sense of space, like winding roads going around hills? That's actually like one of the biggest tricks that we like to use is using roads and hills and banks surrounding them to draw your eyes towards things. I think it's one thing to have, and we'll go to Cardolan later. I want to go over this way so I can show some of the progress in how we've approached interior, exterior spaces, if that makes sense. Um, so one of the things we like to use is things like sight lines and other landmarks to help with natural wayfinding. You know, you see a mountain, you want to climb the mountain. You see these ruins in the distance, and you're kind of compelled to go follow them. You look out over the fields, and you see a road kind of like winding through at the bottom of different like gullies and whatnot. You know, just finding ways to draw your eye to the places where you want the eye to be, excuse me, where you want the eye to be drawn. And some areas are easier to do that in others. You know, like the places like the Trollshaws, where you have very dense forestation, and in the Trollshaws in particular, lots of steep valleys and box canyons that you have to navigate. That makes it much harder to allow for passive navigational information to occur. Um, you know, places like Cardolan and Swanfleet that are much more wide open. You know, you can rely on the contours of the landscape to help pull players in the directions that you want them to go. One of the things I did in a few spots where, you know, I wanted players to be aware that a monster camp was in a given spot. I had these giant like bonfires going and set those up on far view. So even if you were like in the trees, you know, or like deep in the weeds, you could see the smoke of the bonfires trailing up above, and kind of had that as a clue um, as to, you know, where to go, how to go. So here we are at the back of Hod Nirwi. So this is one of the things I was talking about, how we handle the transition from interior to exterior things. You know, now we use like dayfile overrides, trying to use in here in this space anyways, trying to use you know, rocks and whatnot to obstruct my vision as I'm crossing into a space that has a different day file in it. So you'll see as I progress a little bit deeper, my eyes adjust, and now it's a little bit darker. Eventually, I will have my own player key light pop up around me. Because I'm running so fast, that makes it a little bit harder for the transition to catch up. But when you're running at normal speeds or on mount speed, this should be a little bit of a smoother transition. So we'll work our way back out. So this is, you know, it's not a dungeon interior. It's all built on landscape, but it's built to kind of imply that it's a dungeon interior. And then we transition out to the normal day file, and the lighting changes over. So Softsnake GR asks, what about the Lost Temple in Trollshaws? Why did Arnorians build a temple back then? So I'm not entirely familiar with the concept and story of lore that went into the Lost Temple. Oh, I think I need to push the far view out on Karanost a little bit more. See if I can't get those to show up a little bit better before we launch next week. So I'm not entirely certain about the lore and story perspectives of that. My guess is that that is some form of Rhudarim fortress that has, you know, been co-opted by the Gauntmen. You know, it's been abandoned for a very long time, and you know, bad stuff happens when you abandon your house. So as far as so next question, we'll go through here. Yao asks, what did you do with the former abandoned Bree-style village that was south of the location before the impassable that is now buried? Is it now buried underneath the ground, or is it removed? I did stumble across a number of different bits of villages and camps and whatnot that became buried underneath the ground as the height map of Before the Shadow came to be. There's one thing that I did come across that players very often spoke fondly of it, and I did not remove it, and that was the graveyard in the Old Forest. That still exists. It's now freely and easily accessible, so you don't have to juke your way through physics to get at it. And it's close to a quest, like a small quest hub space. All right, time for a Cardolan drink. Alex Mers 1195 asks, what determines the borders of the three kingdoms? They are fairly loose right now, from at least in terms of game perspectives, because in current lore and current game, they don't really exist anymore. Remnants of them exist, but they themselves, like, they're no longer present. As far as like where those borders might be, I would say for Arthedain, you can very comfortably say things like, Northern Breland, the Shire, or Breland in general, the Shire, um, Evendim, and North Downs constitutes Arthedain. Cardolan is Cardolan, with some portions of Southern Breland kind of skewing Cardolan as well. And then Rhudaur basically being everything from Weathertop to the east to get to the Horrorwell, and then north from that wedge basically up into the boundaries of Angmar. That would be the kind of like areas that they all encompass. So things like the Ettenmoors would be considered a part of Rhudaur, and the landscape from basically the Ettenmoors over to the Weather Hills would effectively be Rhudaur as well. So this space here, when we were talking about building Before the Shadow and building Cardolan, one of the things that I set out to do as a prototype was to sit down and see what I could do to build ruins that felt like they were part of a city, using what we had, using the Arnorian ruins as a footprint, because those ruins were never really built to be thought of as as cities. They were more just like building blocks that we could use to make a playground. Um, so that was important to me in the like pre-concept portions of this, was to feel like I could make something that was once inhabited and made sense to be inhabited. And then you're probably noticing that theme of mine through all of this, because that's really something that I felt was important for us to represent as we were building out all of this. So yeah, so we have. So there was a question about, I don't know if I skipped by it, about the other kingdoms having unique symbols as well. Yes, they do. I don't know that they're represented very well in either existing game or um, what we produced here. I know we made some appearance variations so that if we ever did decide to go back and update Breland and North Downs and portions of the Shire with these kind of revamped um, ruins models, that we could do that and have um, specific kingdom assets to represent them. So I don't recall what we landed on for the designs off the top of my head, but I know they exist. All right, let's scroll down, and I think I'm gonna end the stream at Garaband. So I'm gonna read a couple more questions while I start the run there. And that is another POI that I might need to increase the view distance on just a bit. So will the gate that is south of Breland to when it ended Waith be open seems like a natural pathway that was once prevented because of the content at the time. Yes, you will be able to run from Fornost all the way down to Gondor minus the without interruption, minus the teleports that need to happen when you're teleporting between regions. So like if you are running from Fornost, when you get down to the Gap of Rohan, you'll have your teleport when you go into Rohan. Like all of that stuff that is there, and it is all part of the opening of the world. That's a. I think if there's any theme for us in 2022, opening up the world has been that theme. So Eros216 asks or says the skies in Breland and the Lonelands are more similar to each other than either are for Cardolan. What inspired the deep blue skies here? So it was a couple of things. I think wanting to have these bigger, broader, open worlds, open landscapes. We wanted to really make sure that, in addition to the landscape feeling open, the sky felt open. And while the clouds that we have, like in our other regions, look great, and I think they still hold up fairly well, um, they they themselves fill up a lot of the sky. And I wanted to just really push the openness of these spaces and the kind of more wispy sky, the more wispy clouds found in this skybox and the bright blue sky both helped the world feel much more open and helped provide a good contrast to some of the darker colors that we were pushing on the landscape itself. The landscape here is like dark greens, dark reds. So having that like bright blue just even further makes the silhouettes of things stand out even more. So we will get inside here, and I will hit the rest of the questions, and then I think it'll be about time for us to wrap up the stream. I really love what was done to kind of revamp these assets and modernize them a bit more. I think they look so much better, and they're also like so much more simple in terms of the amount of texture work that's needed if we ever wanted to make variants. The original Arnorian set had like so many different textures that it was really hard to make a color variation, whereas these are much better. They're much easier for us to do that kind of work with. So we'll do a quick fly out. Get a view of. I did lie. There's one last place that I want to go, but I'll answer some questions first. So Talarian asks, is the sliding effect from the surface determined solely on the height difference, or is there a player should slide down this surface effect applied? Sometimes it feels you should not slide, but you do, and other times it seems the other. So for that, he's talking about for any surface, whether it's terrain or a physics object, at a certain angle, your character will slide down on it, and it is very specifically programmatically set at a specific angle. I'm not sure what that angle is off the top of my head, but it's very possible that you could be standing on a surface that is 1 degree off from what the you must slide thing is, and you wouldn't slide walking down it. One of the things we tried to do with Swanfleet and Cardolan was to kind of push the concept of what was traversable, what you could walk up, what you couldn't. And I think while there may be some slopes that feel like they may be a little too steep to be climbed, I think the value of that much more the traversable freedom is a win over a couple of slopes here and there that feel like I should slide down them. All right, let's see. So as the tease for the end of this, we're gonna go to one of the spots that, you know, it wouldn't be a major landscape update if something like this wasn't added to just, you know, drive you all a little crazy until 15 years down the line we eventually add the thing that it was teasing. Um, we come up here against these ruins that are blocking your road south to whatever whatever is south. Um, Previously, it was you could walk all the way through and get up to those spikes there, but now it's gated off in current beta. So sorry, everyone that was hoping they'd get out to see the world beyond, get out to see Minhiriath, but Minhiriath is currently closed for business. um, So we'll go through these remaining questions and comments, and then I think we'll call it a night since we're just a little bit over time. Druidfire says, I love the fact that there's all this new land coming and only one portal that's found. So many ways to get to Cardolan and Swanfleet overland. I'm certainly happy to deliver that. That was one of our goals with building it. I'd love to see more IRL atmospherics happening, like sundogs, moondogs, and actual moon phases. I know that would be a huge ask. Some of those things are a little bit more work. Some of those things we just don't have the capability of in our engine currently, but who knows what we might be able to pull off in the future. Okay, so will Minhiriath ever be open for business? At some point, perhaps. Who knows when we'll get to that sort of thing? But it is one of those things that I like to tease, both where we have Minhiriath here, and we have in Mossward, Western, and Edwaith. Those are kind of both of our teases to future content. Not necessarily what we're working on yet, because I will say what I'm working on right now is nowhere near Minhiriath or Western Edwaith, and what we'll be working on for the remainder of the year is neither of those things as well. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. Thank you for asking the questions and for joining me on this tour of the Kingdom of Arnor. I did not go very heavy into the lore, but I'm certain if you are interested, there are plenty of spaces online, wikis, and even other knowledgeable players that you can ask about the history of these three kingdoms and of Arnor in general. For those of you that are looking for a preview of what's coming with Before the Shadow, I believe we have our bull roar up and running right now. This may be our final bull roar before we launch. I don't know if we're planning on doing another one in towards the end of the week or not. But right now it's up. Feel free to jump in and check it out. But otherwise, I will see you all in game in Swanfleet in Cardolan with your actual characters next Tuesday, assuming everything goes as we plan. So thank you, everyone. Also, if you haven't yet and you are interested in doing so, I believe Extra Life is still going strong, and it's always something that we are deeply happy with and humbled by the generosity of our player community. I looked at some of the numbers that were coming in from donations for that, and it's absolutely astounding. You all are an amazing community, and it's amazing to see you supporting this awesome cause as well. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you all next week, and have a great day.